20 experts, 3 days, millions of dollars at stake. And just when Mercer Dynamics was ready to walk away, a janitor with a mop in one hand and a daughter waiting at home walked into the room, glanced at the whiteboard, and changed the future of AI with a single idea. He thought no one was watching. But Sloan Mercer, the coldest CEO in tech was, and what she did next, rewrote all their stories forever. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Let's begin. 3 days, 17 people, 6 emergency meetings, $500,000 in consulting fees, and what do we have to show for it? A mess on a screen. Sloan Mercer's voice sliced through the room like ice against glass. No one answered. Rows of engineers sat in silence, beads of sweat gathering at their collars. The massive LED display in the center of the boardroom glowed, with failure charts bleeding red lines of code cascading like a digital disaster. You have 5 minutes. I want a solution, not another apology. Her heels clicked once on the tile floor before she turned and left. The door whispered shut behind her, leaving behind the stale scent of burnt coffee and stress. Outside the glass wall, a janitor bent over to pick up a spilled soda can. He wore a faded gray uniform and cheap earbuds, one dangling, the other tucked into his ear. But his eyes weren't on the trash. They were fixed on the board where a formula glared back like a riddle waiting to be solved. Gavin Brooks, 36, single father, janitor for the night shift at Mercer Dynamics. What no one knew, he once studied advanced AI at MIT, top of his class until life handed him something tougher than any exam, a daughter, and a funeral for the woman he loved. Inside the boardroom, the lights still glowed. The last team had left, in defeat. Gavin stepped in, setting his mop to the side. The whiteboard stretched across the wall like a battlefield. Equations' mangled logic loops twisted. He reached for a dry rag to wipe it clean and stopped. "Wait a second," he muttered, eyes narrowing. He tilted his head. Something in the math was wrong intuitively, not academically. They were using a linear model on nonlinear behavior. Rookie mistake. Dangerous in the wrong hands. He picked up a red marker. Carefully, he erased a segment, drew a sigmoid curve, circled 2 swapped variables, and underlined a misweighted node. Then he stepped back, crossed his arms, and nodded to himself. "They've been looking at it backwards, and you think you've got it right." The voice behind him was calm, but laced with iron. Gavin turned. Standing at the doorway was Sloan Mercer, CEO of Mercer Dynamics. Dark suit, hair in a sharp bun, eyes that measured everything and everyone. I wasn't trying to mess with anything," Gavin said quickly. "I just noticed something off. So, you're sweeping floors and correcting a $100 million algorithm." "Not correcting, just reframing, like a switching from a dull knife to a sharp one. Same job, less pain." Sloan stepped forward, scanning the board. Without a word, she pulled a tablet from her coat and ran a quick simulation using the changes Gavin had drawn. 8 seconds passed. 18.4% increase in accuracy, she said flatly. Error reduction by over 60%. She turned to him for the first time, really looking. Name: Gavin Brooks. Position: night janitor. 3 shifts a week. Last formal education MIT left junior year. My wife passed away. Needed to raise my daughter. A long pause. "Do you understand what you've done? I didn't mean to step on anyone's toes," Gavin replied. "I just saw something everyone else missed. Sounds like a fortune cookie. Or like this. If the bathtub's clogged, don't pour in more hot water. Try unclogging the drain." Sloan cracked a half smile. Not quite warmth, but something human. "Be in conference room C tomorrow, 8 a.m. You'll be on the observer list." "I don't need to be in a meeting. I'm just—" "That wasn't a suggestion, Mr. Brooks. That was an instruction. What about my daughter? She'll have snacks and zoo tickets if necessary. She doesn't need much, just one reason to believe her dad is worth being proud of. Sloane paused at the door, glancing over her shoulder. For the first time, her gaze softened, not by much, but enough to notice. After tonight, she just might have one, and with that, she disappeared down the hallway. Gavin stood, there for a moment stunned. He looked up at the red scribbles on the white board, then turned to his mop in the corner. "Guess I owe you a raise, old friend." Gavin didn't sleep much that night, not because of nerves or excitement, but because Lena refused to go to bed until he told her the whole story, every detail. So she just walked in. "And you weren't scared?" "Sweetheart," he said, brushing a wisp of her hair behind her ear when you've held your wife's hand in a hospital and told your daughter she can't ask for her anymore. CEOs don't scare you. She blinked and then smiled. Not a childish smile, but the kind that said, "I see you, Dad." Then she leaned in and whispered, "I think she likes you." Gavin chuckled, tucked her in, and stared at the ceiling for a long, long time. By 7:50 a.m., he was standing in front of Conference Room C at Mercer Dynamics, wearing the cleanest button-down shirt he owned, which still had a faint coffee stain near the hem. His old satchel was slung over one shoulder, filled with a notepad, a mechanical pencil, and a folded drawing. Lena made a stick figure holding a mop in one hand and a lightning bolt in the other. Inside the room, suits buzzed around a central screen like moths to a flame. Diagrams lit up the wall. Charts, data points projected timelines. The air smelled like stress and peppermint breath mints. And then she walked in. Sloane Mercer. This time Gavin saw her before she spoke. The room instantly shifted. People stood straighter, voices lowered. The temperature dropped 2 degrees. She glanced at him once, a short, deliberate look, then pointed to an empty chair near the edge of the table. "That's your seat." He didn't ask permission. He just sat. "Let's begin," she said, snapping the room into focus. "Yesterday, we witnessed a miscalculation, one that nearly cost us a multi-phase contract and exposed fundamental weaknesses in our predictive loop. But last night, she tapped her tablet. Gavin's sketch, his raw red marker corrections, appeared on the main screen. "Someone gave us a gift," the room murmured. Eyes flicked to Gavin, then quickly away. "This adjustment reduced our training error by 60%, reduced latency by 22 milliseconds, and made it painfully clear." She paused. "That expertise can look very different than what we expect." Silence. Then one hand rose. Jason Marlowe, Senior Systems Engineer, MBA from Stanford. Eyes that said, "I'm trying to be polite but dying to crush you." "With all due respect," he began, "which is what people say, right before disrespecting you. How do we verify this isn't just a fluke?" "Run the model," Sloane replied. Jason hesitated, then keyed in the new parameters. The simulation ran smooth, no overfitting. Predictive behavior aligned across multiple data sets. The green bar glowed. "Still could be luck," Jason muttered. "Maybe." Gavin spoke for the first time. Calm, steady. "But if it is, I hope we're smart enough to learn from luck when it walks in with a mop." A few quiet chuckles. Sloane didn't smile, but she did nod very slightly like a judge acknowledging an unexpected but valid argument. After the meeting, she caught up with him near the elevators. "You held your own," she said. "I wasn't trying to. That's why it worked." They rode down together, silence at first. Then she asked, "Do you always think like that?" "In analogies, I fix things," Gavin replied. "I've had to, and I talk to my daughter like she's 6, not 60. So I explain tech like it's plumbing, baking, car repairs. It sticks better that way." "Interesting. Useful. You might be right." He hesitated, then looked at her sideways. "Do you always talk like that? Like what? Like you're managing a courtroom instead of having a conversation?" For a beat, she said nothing. Then I manage what I can control. Even conversations, especially conversations, they stepped into the lobby. I don't do casual. Mr. Brooks, she said flatly. Then I'm probably your worst nightmare, he said, offering the faintest grin. Maybe, she murmured, but you solved a nightmare last night. That afternoon, Gavin returned to his regular shift. Back in uniform, back with his mop and cart. But something had changed. People nodded now when they passed him in the hallway, not just the interns, even the engineers. One even said niece work in a tone that wasn't sarcastic. And Lena had drawn a new picture. This one had him standing beside a tall woman in a black suit. The caption said, "Dad plus lightning lady to best team." Meanwhile, in her office, Sloane stood alone at the massive window overlooking the city. A storm was rolling in. She didn't mind. She tapped her tablet, brought up Gavin's simulation again, watched the lines smooth out again and again into order. No formal degree, no position, no permissions. And still, she whispered to herself. A knock on the door. It was Arthur, her longtime CTO, early 50s, loyal, blunt, and the only person in the company who dared speak to her without filtering his words. That janitor's got people talking. Let them talk. You think he's got more in him? I know he does. Arthur crossed his arms. You're considering giving him access. I'm considering listening more carefully to voices that don't come from boardrooms. Arthur raised an eyebrow. You've changed. He made the system better, Sloane said simply. No, Arthur replied. He made you better. She didn't respond, but she watched. The rain began to trace soft lines across the glass, and for the first time in a long time. She didn't feel the need to solve anything, not right away. The invitation came by email, but not to Gavin's inbox. It came to HR, who printed it out, walked it across the building and handed it to him while he was scrubbing out a coffee spill on the 3rd floor. You're requested, the woman from HR said, blinking like she couldn't believe the words herself, in the executive strategy meeting tomorrow. 10 sharp. Gavin looked up from his bucket. You sure that's not for someone else? Name says Gavin Brooks. Title says janitor. Sounds about right. Says guest contributor technical observation role, whatever that means. It means they're out of ideas, he said, standing up and wiping his hands on a rag and getting desperate. She smirked, but there was something else in her eyes, too. Curiosity, maybe even hope. He didn't go home that night. Instead, he went to the 24-hour laundromat 2 blocks from Mercer Dynamics, washed his only 2 dress shirts. He didn't sit down, just leaned against the dryer, flipping through an old notebook filled with scribbles, napkin math, and a few sketched faces of Lena making silly expressions. You think this is a good idea? He whispered to no one. Going, in there with them. He could hear his late wife's voice in his head. Gavin, you overthink everything. Just be the guy who listens. That's the guy people trust. By morning, he was still tired, but a little more ready. The strategy room was on the top floor. Glass walls, oversized windows, the kind of room that makes regular people feel very, very small. Gavin stood out like a coffee stain on white linen. No lanyard, no blazer, just his one clean shirt, Lena's lucky stone in his pocket, and a notepad he hadn't opened since she lost her first tooth. Is this the janitor? The question came from a man with 2 perfect teeth and a too tight tie. You can say Gavin, he replied calmly. Or guest contributor, if that's easier. Sloane entered just in time to catch the exchange. He's here because none of you cracked the neural lag issue, she said, not looking at anyone in particular. He did. He's earned the seat. Let's begin. That silenced the room. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. Gavin didn't say much, but when he did, heads turned. He didn't use jargon, didn't throw out fancy acronyms or buzzwords. Instead, he drew parallels. "Think of your AI model like a single parent learning to juggle 3 jobs," he said once. "You're pushing it to optimize results without giving it time to understand why it's being asked to change." Someone laughed. Another murmured, "Damn, that's actually true." Jason, the senior engineer, tried not to show his irritation. "I'm just wondering if we're now basing our roadmap on bedtime analogies," he said dryly. "You ever raised a kid, Jason?" "No." "Then maybe don't knock bedtime. It's where the real learning happens." That got more laughs than Jason expected and more nods than Gavin thought he'd earn. After the meeting, Gavin stepped into the hallway, exhaling slowly. Sloane followed him out, holding 2 takeaway coffees. "Didn't peg you for a performer," she said, handing him one. "I'm not, but I've been underestimated long enough to get good at playing along." That line about bedtime. Not a line. That's my life. They walked side by side, the silence between them less sharp now, more like space held open on purpose. "Why didn't you go back to engineering?" she asked. "Because MIT doesn't hand out scholarships for widowed single dads who take night shifts and pack lunchboxes before dawn." "But you could have reapplied, gone back, rebuilt it all." "I didn't want to rebuild my life. I wanted to build hers first." She stopped walking. "You talk like someone who doesn't realize how rare that is, or like someone who's too tired to care how rare it is." She looked at him, then really looked at him, and for the first time, her voice softened. "Maybe it's time you stop being the guy who makes things easier for everyone else, and let someone build something for you too." Gavin didn't answer, but his silence wasn't cold, just unfamiliar ground. Later that day, he returned home to Lena, waiting by the door, shoebox in hand. "How was it?" she asked. "Grown-ups in fancy rooms, saying words that don't mean much until someone brings up bedtime stories." "So you did tell the dad analogy?" "Sure did." And no one booed. She grinned and opened the shoebox. Inside was a sandwich, 2 stickers, and a folded piece of paper. "I made you a new business card," she said proudly. It read, "Gavin Brooks, fixer of thing solver of grown-up problems, full-time dad. You left out mop operator. I upgraded you." Meanwhile, at Mercer Dynamics, Jason stood in Sloane's office, arms crossed. "You're elevating him too fast," he said. "No, I'm just recognizing value when I see it. He doesn't understand corporate structure. He doesn't have the credentials." Neither did Steve Jobs when he started. Credentials didn't write that code. Insight did. Jason clenched his jaw. "What's really going on here, Sloane? You promoting talent or chasing something else?" Her eyes didn't flinch. "Let me ask you something, Jason. When's the last time you surprised yourself?" "He does that every day and doesn't even call it ambition. He calls it surviving." Jason left without a word. Sloane sat down, opened her laptop, and stared at the simulation results again. Not because she needed confirmation, but because they reminded her of something she'd almost forgotten. Clarity. Something Gavin Brooks brought into rooms without meaning to. It started with a voicemail. Gavin played it 3 times before deciding. It wasn't a prank. "Mr. Brooks, this is Cecilia from the executive office. Miss Mercer asked me to extend a personal invitation. Tonight, 7:00 p.m., private dinner, not business. No tie required. Not business." He stared at the phone like it might explain itself. But phones don't do that. Not when the woman in question is Sloane Mercer. He stood outside at his bistro, a little place tucked between a flower shop and a boutique. Hotel on the quiet side of town. It was the kind of restaurant where the chairs didn't match on purpose, and the servers knew the owner's dog by name. Sloane was already there, sitting at a window table, her hair down for the first time. Soft waves, no armor, just her. Gavin entered, suddenly aware of his scuffed boots and jacket that had seen one too many winters. "You clean up well?" she said, looking up with a half smile. I own exactly one not terrible shirt. You're looking at it. Then we're both overdressed for not a date. They sat, and for a while neither spoke. The clinking of glasses, soft jazz from the corner speaker, and the scent of rosemary bread filled the space where small talk usually lives. Sloane finally broke the silence. Do you know why I asked you here? You like watching underqualified men panic over wine lists because I haven't had a real conversation in 3 years. Not one that didn't involve quarterly reports or lawsuits. Gavin raised an eyebrow. You're telling me no one ever asks how your day was? They ask. But they're really asking how my performance affects theirs. She looked away, eyes distant. I eat lunch at my desk. I sign more NDAs than birthday cards. And some days I forget what my own voice sounds like unless it's giving instructions. Gavin leaned forward. Sounds like you need to fire your calendar and hire a therapist. I tried that. He quit after 2 sessions. Why? Said I made him anxious. Gavin laughed a full, unfiltered laugh that made 2 diners glance over. Sloane looked at him surprised, then joined in. Quietly at first, then more freely. There it is, he said, nodding. What? The human part of the glacier. She tilted her head, amused. You always talk like this. Only when I'm too tired to pretend. I belong here. The food came something he couldn't pronounce and something she didn't bother explaining. It didn't matter. For the first time in years, Sloane ate slowly. Gavin listened without interrupting, and the conversation drifted to childhoods, to the moment you realize your parents are just people to favorite books and bad movie endings, to loss. I still hear her voice sometimes, Gavin said quietly. I'm not thinking. Like when Lena falls asleep in the car or when I smell cinnamon on cold mornings. Your wife? Yeah. How long's it been? 6 years. You speak like she's still close. She is, just not in the way I want. Sloane didn't respond right away. My mother was all ambition, she said finally. She told me I could rule the world if I never let anyone too close. Said emotion was weakness in a suit. And you believed her longer than I should have. They paused. Then Gavin pulled something from his pocket. Lena's newest drawing, now folded and worn at the edges. She drew this the day I spoke, in that big boardroom. He said I looked like a hero, like one of those people who fixes broken machines and broken hearts with the same toolbox. Sloane unfolded the paper. A stick figure with wild hair holding hands with a taller woman in heels, both smiling. A sun in the corner. A tiny mop in the background next to a laptop. She stared at it longer than he expected. You know, she said softly. I've signed multi-million-dollar deals, launched products in 5 countries, and stood on stages in front of CEOs who get nervous before I speak. And nothing has made me feel more seen than this crayon sketch from a little girl I've never met. They left the restaurant after 10 ducros. The night air was cool, crisp, the kind that makes your lungs feel cleaner than they really are. Sloane walked a step behind him, then stopped beside his truck. You still drive this old thing. It runs and it's paid off. You'd be surprised how rare that is. She leaned against the passenger door. You're a strange man, Gavin Brooks. Coming. From you, I'll take that as a compliment. He opened the driver's side, but paused before getting in. Why'd you really ask me here, Sloane? Because I needed to remember what truth sounds like. And you don't perform. You just show up. He nodded. That was enough. See you at work, he said, climbing into the truck. Gavin. He turned back. What? I like bedtime stories. And with that, she turned and disappeared into the night heels, clicking like punctuation on a sentence neither of them wanted to end. The next morning started just like any other. Gavin dropped Lena off at school. She gave him a hug, tighter than usual, and whispered, You're shining, Daddy. People are starting to see it. He smiled the whole way to work, until he walked into Mercer Dynamics and felt it, the change, the shift in temperature, not in degrees, But in demeanor, fewer smiles, colder glances, and silence that didn't feel like peace. It felt like tension coiled behind polite nods. He tried not to let it bother him, but as he reached for his ID badge, a security guard, one he'd joked with just last week, stopped him. "Sorry, sir. You've been moved off the janitorial roster. What your clearance is now? Executive access. CTO's orders. Guess you've been promoted." The words felt more like a warning than a welcome. In the elevator, Jason Marlowe was waiting, tie straight, jaw tighter than usual. "New title," he said, not bothering to smile. Didn't realize there was one. "Oh, there is. Special Technical Advisor to the CEO. Must be nice to skip the ladder." "I didn't skip anything," Gavin said calmly. "I've been climbing for years, just on a staircase no one bothered to look at." Jason stepped closer, voice low. "Let me give you some advice, Mop Man. These people smile to your face because Sloan says so. But they're not your friends. You don't belong here." Gavin looked him straight in the eye. "If I waited to belong, my daughter would still be hungry. I didn't come here to be liked. I came here to build something that works." Later that morning, in the strategy room, the team reviewed Gavin's suggested optimization for the autonomous response model. His calculations were right, his solution was clean, but the room sat frozen. Jason spoke first. "We ran the numbers again. Gavin's logic checks out, but we're not implementing it." Sloan looked up sharply. "Excuse me. It's untested at scale. No precedent. We'd be taking a PR risk using code from someone who doesn't even have a college degree. You're saying the math is fine, but the resume isn't." Jason didn't blink. "We're a billion-dollar firm. Our clients don't want janitor genius headlines. They want pedigree, stability, legacy." The room nodded slowly, hesitantly. Gavin sat quietly, not defending himself, just watching like a man who's been through worse storms and knows which way the wind is blowing. Sloan's eyes locked on him. "Gavin, do you want to respond?" He leaned forward, voice steady. "I get it. I'm not what you expected, and maybe that's uncomfortable. But if the numbers work and the system improves, then who's really being unprofessional? The man fixing the problem or the team ignoring the solution? And if I'd come in here with a Stanford degree and a $1,000 blazer, you'd be calling this innovation. But because I smell like bleach and wear my daughter's sticker on my laptop, you're calling it a liability." A pause. Then if a man's value is measured by how expensive his mistakes are, maybe it's time we start measuring value differently. The room was silent. Sloan stood slowly. "We'll implement the update." Jason didn't argue, not out loud, but his glare said everything. That afternoon, Gavin found Sloan on the rooftop balcony. She was staring at the skyline, arms crossed, jacket off, sleeves rolled. "Tough room," he said softly. "They're used to predictable outcomes and polished origins. You're not." "No," she said. "I'm used to excellence no matter where it hides." They stood quietly for a beat. Then Gavin asked, "Why are you fighting for me?" She turned to him. "Because you remind me of something I used to believe in before I traded it for. Board seats and branding guides, what's that? The idea that brilliance doesn't need permission?" He smiled. "That's a nice idea. Dangerous in the wrong hands. So is silence." But silence was exactly what followed. In the days after Gavin noticed fewer nods, conversation stopped when he entered rooms. Slack channels he used to be copied on went quiet. Even the engineers who once asked him for advice now avoided eye contact. Only Arthur the CTO stayed the same, gruff, honest, grounded. One evening, as Gavin reviewed code in the break room, Arthur sat beside him with 2 cups of black coffee. "You rattled them. Didn't mean to. Didn't need to. You just exist. That's the threat. Feels like I'm being pushed out of a room I never asked to be in. That's because you're not playing their game. You're playing life. And life scares the hell out of people who've never had to survive it." Gavin looked up tired. "Am I wasting my time here?" "Not if you remember what time's worth." And not if you're doing this for more than just a paycheck. He looked down at Lena's drawing again, now creased from his pocket, but never torn. I'm doing it for her. Arthur clapped him on the back once. Then you're already winning. That night. At home, Lena sat on the couch building a puzzle while Gavin reheated leftover stew. Did they like your new idea, Daddy? Some did. Some not so much. You told the truth, right? I did. Then you did your job. He sat beside her, watching her small fingers move a sky-colored piece into place. What if people don't like me for doing the right thing? Then you look for people who do. Simple, wise. 6 years old. He kissed her forehead. You ever think about running this company one day? Only if it comes with free popsicles. I'll write it into the contract. They both laughed, and in that moment, soft, ordinary, imperfect Gavin remembered exactly why he started this journey. Not to be accepted, not to prove himself, but to create a world where his daughter wouldn't have to. Sloane Mercer didn't notice the first time. She breathed past the janitor's closet without looking twice. The mop bucket wasn't in its usual spot, but she barely registered it. Meetings bled into meetings. Deadlines barked. Investors circled like sharks. But by the third day, something strange crept into the air. Silence. The kind of silence that settles after a door slams and no one comes back. Gavin Brooks was gone. The empty seat in the back corner of the lab stayed empty. His name was quietly removed from the internal Slack channel. No memo, no explanation. Someone else was assigned to nightly code cleanup, but no one corrected logic the way he did. No one saw patterns the way he did. The AI models had started to drift again. Just a little. Just enough. And yet, no one mentioned his name, except her. Sloane stood alone in the observation deck overlooking the testing lab. The floor below glowed with monitor light and soft chatter. She should have felt satisfied. The new update had passed internal tests. Stock was up 4.7%. On paper, it was a win. But inside her, something felt missing. She found herself looking at the corner Gavin used to stand in hands in pockets, head-tilted eyes, squinting like he could. See the soul of a line of code, now just an empty space. A cleaner swept silently past, not stopping to offer input. Of course, he didn't. He was just there to clean like Gavin was until he wasn't. That night back in her office, she stared at her desk. It was pristine, perfect like always, except for a faint brown stain near the edge, barely noticeable unless the light hit just right. It had been a coffee spill. Gavin's first meeting. He'd set down his thermos and apologized instantly. Sorry, this thing leaks hope and caffeine in equal measure. She hadn't laughed then, but now she didn't want the stain wiped away. She stayed late. Everyone had gone home, but she wandered the halls like a woman in someone else's life. In the hallway near the sublee, she passed the break room, lights dimmed, chairs stacked. On a small corkboard by the door, pinned among old flyers and shift reminders, was a tiny envelope. Her name was written in uneven purple crayon, to Miss Mercer from Lena Brooks. She stared at it for several seconds, unsure whether to smile or break. She took the envelope gently, like it might vanish if touched too quickly. Inside was a folded piece of paper with stars drawn in every corner. In the center, in a child's careful handwriting, were only a few lines. Thank you for believing in my dad. He used to smile when he talked about you. Now he doesn't smile much, but I still do. Lena, age 634. Sloane sat down on the bench beside the vending machine. For the first time in months, she took off her heels, folded her legs underneath her like a child, and cried. She didn't tell anyone where she was going the next morning. No driver, no bodyguard, just a black coat, a scarf wrapped tightly, and Lena's letter folded in her pocket like a compass. She found Gavin's apartment after 20 minutes, circling a neighborhood that hadn't seen a new coat of paint in years. The steps creaked. The elevator didn't work. The hallway smelled of old curry and rainwater. When she knocked, it was Lena who opened the door. "You're the lady from work," she said matter-of-factly. "The one who makes Daddy nervous." Sloane blinked. You want to come in? We don't have guest chairs, but we have floor." Inside the apartment was small, cluttered with toys and folded laundry. A stack of engineering books leaned sideways on the counter. A battered laptop blinked softly on the coffee table. "Daddy's out looking for jobs. He doesn't think he'll find one, but I told him the sun doesn't ask permission to rise." "Did you get that from a cartoon?" Sloane asked softly. "No, from Daddy." Lena pulled out a box of Legos and pointed to the floor. "You can build with me? I only let people I trust help with the roof." Sloane hesitated, then sat. The blocks were mismatched. The colors didn't coordinate, but Lena's hands moved with certainty, and slowly a small house began to form. He left because he thought he embarrassed. "You?" Lena said suddenly. "People were laughing online. I think it hurt." "It wasn't his fault," Sloane replied. "And it didn't embarrass me. It reminded me of what really matters." "Do you miss him?" Sloane exhaled. "Yes, and I didn't expect to." Lena nodded and offered her a green block. "If you make him smile again, I'll forgive you." Sloane bit back a laugh and wiped at the corner of her eye. Deal. Later, standing by the door, she hesitated. "Can I leave a message for your dad?" "Sticky notes are over there," Lena pointed. "Blue ones are for regular stuff. Pink ones are for important feelings." Sloane picked a pink note. She wrote only 5 words. "We never got to finish," then underlined it and added SM. That night, Gavin came home to find Lena asleep on the couch. The Lego house balanced on her stomach like a crown jewel. He smiled tiredly, then saw the note. Read it. Stared at it for a long time, then looked down at his daughter. She was still smiling in her sleep, and for the first time in days, he did. 2. The sun hadn't fully broken through the haze when Sloane Mercer stepped off the subway and into a world that smelled of old brick-roasted peanuts and wet laundry. She walked briskly, her heels muted on the cracked sidewalk, trying to ignore how out of place she looked in her tailored coat and clean lines. But this wasn't the kind of neighborhood where appearances were currency. Here, people traded in quiet survival. Apartment 3B sat at the end of a hallway that echoed every footstep. She knocked once, twice, a pause, then the click of small feet running. The door creaked open, and there she was. Lena Brooks in a glittery unicorn t-shirt and mismatched socks, her curls held back by a paperclip. Ms. Arte and Sloane, the little girl, beamed as if they were old friends. "You came back." Sloane smiled faintly. "I said I would. Daddy's not home. He's at the place with the slow computers and the grumpy man. You want to come in anyway?" Sloane hesitated, but then Lena tugged gently at her coat sleeve, and the decision was made. "We're making pancakes from scratch today," Lena declared, marching into the kitchenette. "Well, we were, but then I ran out of scratch." Sloane raised a brow. "Scratch? You know, the stuff you need when the box says from scratch. I think it's like sugar or magic. I'm still investigating." Sloane laughed. A real laugh, not the half-smile she gave investors when they asked dumb questions. "May I sit?" "You can sit anywhere that isn't sticky," Lena said, sweeping her arm dramatically across the cluttered room. "I suggest the beanbag. It's only mildly suspicious." Sloane lowered herself onto the beanbag, surprisingly comfortable for something that looked like it had survived a pillow war. Her eyes scanned the room shelves packed with children's books, a robot made of soda cans, a cardboard box labeled important inventions in crayon. But it was the wall by the window that stopped her breath. A collage of photos, Lena and Gavin at the park holding science fair trophies at what looked like a hospital. And in the center, a woman. Kind eyes, soft smile, the same curls as Lena. "That's Mommy," Lena said quietly, as if sensing Sloane's gaze. "She died when I was 3, but Daddy still talks to her sometimes when he thinks I'm sleeping." Sloane's voice caught. "She looks gentle." She was. Daddy said she loved 3 things: Rainstorm's old poetry and the way he made scrambled eggs. That's a good list. "He stopped making eggs when she died," Lena said matter of fact. "But he started, making robots and games and bedtime stories with maps in them." Sloane blinked back the lump rising in her throat. He said, "When someone's heart breaks, you either let it stay broken or you build something beautiful from the pieces." He really said that. "Yep. Right after we accidentally set the toaster on fire. It was a very emotional morning." Sloane smiled, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Lena," she asked gently, "do you know why your dad left the company?" Lena looked, up at her with more gravity than any 6-year-old should carry. He thought he made people uncomfortable, that people didn't want a janitor who was smart, that they'd never see the difference between being out of place and being brilliant. The words struck like glass, clear, sharp, and impossible to ignore. He always says, "Sometimes people get scared when the wrong person turns out to be right." Sloane leaned forward. "You talk like someone twice your age. That's 'cause I borrow Daddy's heart sometimes. He's got an extra big one, but it gets tired." The room went quiet. Sloane reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small wrapped box. "Can I give you something?" Lena nodded. Inside was a tiny USB drive with a purple ribbon tied around it. "It's a game," Sloane said. "Your dad helped design the core mechanic. It's not public yet. I thought you might be the first to test it." Lena's eyes lit up. "Does it have dragons?" "Kind of. It has dragons that don't know they're dragons. They think they're pigeons until they try to fly too far and discover they breathe fire." Lena's mouth formed a perfect O. "That's awesome." She clutched the box to her chest like it was a treasure map. "Ms. Sloane." "Yes." "If you make Daddy smile again, I'll forgive you." The words landed with a gentle finality, like a verdict that had been decided by a jury of one. Sloane didn't speak. She couldn't. Instead, she nodded. A solemn, quiet promise. As she walked, back down the hallway, the air felt different, less like distance, more like a path. Sloane looked up at the overcast sky, feeling the weight of the weak press against her shoulders, and for the first time, she didn't mind. Back at the office, she stepped into her private conference room and pulled the blinds. Her assistant asked if she wanted to reschedule the afternoon calls. She said no, she had something more important to do. She turned to her tablet and began drafting a memo. But not just any memo, a personal invitation, a correction, a new beginning. And at the top of the screen, she wrote only one line before pausing. "Some bridges are worth rebuilding by hand." Gavin Brooks hadn't expected to see her again, not standing in the hallway of his daughter's school, not with her arms crossed and a folder in hand, not with that same unflinching calm in her eyes, the kind that made deals happen that broke IPO records and silences in equal measure. But there she was, waiting. "You came all this way," he said, adjusting the worn strap of his satchel. "I needed to see you in person. Most CEOs send an email. Most janitors don't solve AI logic trees with a whiteboard marker." Gavin looked away, a half smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. "So what now?" he asked. "You want me to mop up the next crisis too?" "No," she said, voice firm. "I want you to present at the investor summit." Silence. Total weighted laugh out loud kind of silence. Gavin blinked. "You want me?" "What?" "Take the stage. Explain the algorithm revisions you inspired. Walk them through the simplified AI learning loop. Be the person they associate with our breakthrough." Sloan, I don't do suits or speeches or rooms with more than 6 people in a fire exit. You don't need a suit or a script. You need truth. And you have that in spades. They'll see me, the guy who used to clean floors. Good. Maybe they need to. She stepped closer. When you speak, people listen. Not because you demand it, but because you've lived what the rest of us only model in code. Gavin shook his head slowly, unsure whether to laugh or run. Why me? Because I forgot what this company was built on, she said softly. Not polish, not projections people. And if it all goes wrong, then it goes wrong with your name, not mine. That stopped him. You're putting your neck on the line for me? No, she said. I'm standing beside you while you put yours on the line for something you already helped build. He stared at her for a long time, then nodded. One condition. Name it. No teleprompters, no handlers, no voice in my ear telling me how to sound. Smarter. Deal. And one more thing, he added. Yes. Don't disappear again. Not for me. Not from Lena. The air shifted. She didn't smile, but something warmer, quieter flickered in her eyes. I wasn't planning to. 2 days later, the Mercer Dynamics Annual Investor Summit opened in the Pacific Grand Auditorium. Gavin stood backstage, hands clammy, wearing a clean but wrinkled button-up shirt Lena had insisted he not tuck in. You look like a magician, she'd told him. A really nervous one. The room beyond the curtain was packed. Hundreds of eyes, high-stakes whispers, cameras. Gavin peeked out and spotted her Sloan at the back of the room standing, not sitting. Her hands clasped tightly in front of her like she was holding her breath. He inhaled. It's just a room, he whispered to himself. A really expensive room, with too many opinions. He stepped out and everything went still. No PowerPoint, no charts, just Gavin and a microphone. I used to mop this floor, he began. 2 months ago, I was the guy who came in after hours and wiped smudges off whiteboards. Smudges made by people trying to solve billion-dollar problems. A few polite laughs. Turns out one of those smudges wasn't a mistake. It was a missing piece. He walked slowly grounded. I don't have an MBA. I don't own a tie. But I know what it's like to raise a daughter on second chances and stretch one paycheck into 6 solutions. He paused. What Mercer Dynamics is doing with AI, it isn't just code. It's clarity. It's a chance to make systems more human, not less. He clicked a button revealing a simple diagram, a child's drawing of a tree root's tangled branches bent toward the sun. This is how machines learn. Like children, trial, error, encouragement, patience, and every so often the right correction at the right moment. He looked up. I was just the janitor. But maybe being invisible helped me see what everyone else missed. And for a beat, no one moved. Then someone stood clapping, then another, and another, until the room thundered with applause. Not for polish, not for power. For something far rarer. Truth. Backstage, Sloan met him with a look that held too many things to say. I think you just saved our entire year, she whispered. That wasn't the plan, Gavin replied. Then what was say? Something honest. Hope it lands. While she said eyes softer than he'd ever seen them. It landed. Before she turned to walk away, he gently touched her arm. You still owe me one. Do I? Yeah. You never told me why you really came to see me again. She looked at him. No defense left. Because Lena made me see something I'd stopped believing in. What's that? That brilliance doesn't come with a title, and that kindness can be terrifying. She hesitated. And because I missed your coffee, even the kind that leaks hope. Gavin chuckled. Dangerous stuff. That's what makes it good. That night, Gavin walked into his apartment to find Lena asleep on the couch again, a bag of popcorn half-eaten beside her, a Lego dragon perched on her shoulder. He kissed her forehead, then looked out the window into the city that never seemed to pause. Something had changed. Not the skyline, not the salary, but the way he carried his own name, and for the first time in years it didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. The grand ballroom of the Pacific Grand Hotel shimmered under the weight of pressure. 500 investors, Silicon Valley's titans, a dozen journalists, and one janitor-turned-unlikely presenter pacing behind the curtain with his pulse ticking louder than the opening chime of the event. Gavin Brooks took a breath. Not the kind you take to calm yourself, but the kind you take when there's no turning back. He peeked through the curtain. Lena sat in the back row wearing her favorite Galaxy hoodie legs swinging from a plush velvet. Seat too big for her. Beside her, Sloane stood, arms crossed, gaze fixed ahead, but not cold this time. Steady, hopeful. Their eyes met. She didn't nod. She didn't smile. She just looked at him like he already belonged. The host's voice echoed through the ballroom. And now, a voice you haven't heard before, but one you'll be glad you did. Please welcome Gavin Brooks. A murmur rippled through the room. Wait. The janitor. Gavin stepped into the spotlight. No slides, no flashy animations, just him, a handheld mic, and a simple image projected behind him, a blank page. He adjusted the mic, looked around, then said quietly, I was supposed to clean this room. Tonight. The audience stilled. I almost didn't show up, not because I was afraid of speaking, but because I was afraid of being seen. He let the pause hang. People leaned in. 6 weeks ago, I was sweeping floors at Mercer Dynamics. Tonight, I'm here because someone forgot to erase the whiteboard, and I saw something no one else did. He pointed toward the blank screen. That's how most people see men like me. Like this blank, replaceable. He clicked once. A crude sketch appeared. A neural network drawn by hand, the same one he had scribbled on the board that night. But what if the solution isn't hidden in the data or the degrees or the corner offices? What if it's hidden in people we stopped listening to? He began walking the way a teacher might in a classroom, not a presenter trying to sell. I'm not a genius. I dropped out of MIT to raise a daughter who now believes dragons are just shy pigeons. Polite laughter. But I've spent the last few years watching how the world works when no one's watching it back. And here's what I've learned. Another click. The screen changed. A stick figure holding a mop standing beside a massive machine labeled AI Loop. Machines learn like children. With trial and error. With patience, with repetition, and most importantly, with trust. He turned speaking not to impress, but to connect. If a janitor can fix a learning loop, maybe the loop was never broken. Maybe we just built it to ignore the wrong kind of voice. For a long beat, no one moved. Then someone in the front row, a woman in a red blazer, began clapping softly, slowly. A second joined, then a third, until the entire ballroom rose to its feet. Not for the data, not for the algorithm, for the courage of being human in a room. Designed to reward Polish. Backstage, Sloane exhaled for the first time in 20 minutes. Lena tugged on her sleeve. He didn't use any fancy words. That's why it worked. That's exactly why it worked, Sloane whispered. Does this mean he gets promoted to supered? She smiled. He already was. After the applause died, Gavin slipped backstage, heart pounding in a different rhythm now. Relief, release. And then came the voice of someone unexpected. Mr. Brooks, said Arthur Feldman, chairman of Mercer Dynamics board, approaching with a rare smile. That was one hell of a presentation. Gavin extended his hand cautiously. Thank you, sir. You're not the janitor anymore. Effective immediately, we'd like to bring you in as lead innovation advisor. Gavin blinked. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Arthur grinned. Just don't stop doing what you're doing. He disappeared into the crowd, and Gavin stood frozen for a beat before turning and finding Sloane standing in the corner of the hallway. Quiet. Waiting. He approached slowly. So I'm guessing that went better than expected. You made a ballroom. Full of millionaires question their egos, she said softly. Not bad for a night's work. I didn't do it alone. He looked past her. Lena had fallen asleep on a velvet bench. Her tiny fists curled around the game cartridge he'd promised she could play after Daddy's scary speech. I said a lot of words out. There, he continued. But the only ones that mattered were the ones I didn't get to say. Like thank you for showing up, for seeing me, for not running when it got uncomfortable. Sloane's voice trembled just slightly. I don't run anymore, I just circle the block a few times before I knock. Gavin smiled, stepping closer. You know, I thought I was doing this for Lena to give her something better. And now I think she gave me something better. A reason to stop hiding behind good enough, a reason to try again. Sloane nodded, then after a breath. What happens next? Next? Gavin said, glancing back at Lena. We go home. We read a bedtime story. We try not to burn the eggs in the morning. He looked at her. And maybe if you're not too busy saving the company, you join us for pancakes. Sloane raised an eyebrow. You cook terribly, but I serve with style. Then it's a date, she said softly. A breakfast. Don't get carried away. One step at a time, Brooks. That night, as the city lit up in gold and violet hues outside his apartment window, Gavin sat on the edge of his couch, Lena curled against his side. He looked at her, then at the email pinging on his screen. Subject, welcome to the leadership, team. But it wasn't the job title that stuck with him. It was the quiet heartbeat of something else. He wasn't the man behind the mop anymore. He was the man who had learned how to be seen without changing who he was. And somewhere between the mop and the mic, he had found his voice. The boardroom was empty now. Gone were the suits, the spotlights, the polite applause that shook the rafters earlier that day. Only the ghost of tension lingered in the carpet, the kind that doesn't dissolve until someone finally says what should have been said long ago. Gavin stood by the window holding a lukewarm cup of coffee. Below, the city buzzed as if nothing had changed, yet everything had. Behind him, the door opened softly. Sloane, wearing the same black blazer from the presentation, though it hung a little looser now, like the pressure had drained from her shoulders. Finally. Didn't expect you to still be here, she said gently. Didn't expect to feel like I belonged here, he replied without turning around. Silence, not awkward, just thick with unsaid things. She walked toward the opposite end of the room and sat down at the head of the long glass table. The chair squeaked softly under her. You were brilliant today, she said. I didn't memorize a word of it. That's what made it brilliant. He smiled, finally turning to face her. Then, so why do I still feel like I might wake up in my old uniform tomorrow? Because people like us don't come from the kind of world where dreams feel safe, she said, voice quiet. We build, we protect, but we rarely receive. He watched her, carefully. Now, you included. Especially me. She stood up and walked over to him, stopping a few feet away. You asked me once why I came back to see you. Why I didn't just let the story fade. Yeah. It wasn't because of PR or optics or even the algorithm. She looked down at her hands fidgeting. Something rare in a woman who once told a Fortune 500 investor to his face. Either get in or get out of my way. I came back because you made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. He said nothing, just waited gently. It wasn't just the way you saw things in code. It was the way you looked at the world. Like broken pieces weren't something to discard, but something to build from. That's because I'm made of broken pieces. Exactly, she whispered. She stepped closer. Do you know what it's like to spend your whole life being the smartest person in the room and still feeling utterly alone in it? He nodded slowly. Do you know what it's like to hold back good news because there's no one to share it with? Every time I brought Lena home a drawing from work that I was proud of, he said, and she'd clap like I'd cured cancer. She laughed soft and full this time, then quietly. You scare me, Gavin. That caught him off guard. Why? because you're not trying to impress me or fix me or chase something. I'm just here. Exactly. And I don't know how to stand still. For a moment, neither of them moved. Just the night light of the city blinking in rhythm. Then Gavin spoke. Do you know what I realized tonight? Tell me that love doesn't always come dressed in declarations and grand gestures. Sometimes it shows up as a woman walking into a janitor's hallway and demanding answers. She laughed again, a hand covering her mouth. I'm not great with subtlety. Good because I'm terrible at guessing games. He took a slow step closer. I think I've been falling for you ever since you didn't erase the marker I left on the board. And I think I've been falling for you ever since you didn't apologize for writing on it. Their eyes locked. Not hungry, not desperate, just sure. They moved closer gently until their foreheads touched, breathing the same unhurried air. Then she whispered, Can I ask you something? Anything? Do you think it's possible to build something real out of something that started by accident? He pulled back slightly, met her eyes. Some of the best stories start when someone walks into the wrong room? You think this is a story? No, he said softly. I think this is a chapter we almost didn't get to write. She closed her eyes, let the words settle, then opened them again. Promise me something. You name it. That if I fall apart again, you'll remind me who I really am. Only if you promise to do the same when I forget who I've become. She nodded. Deal. They didn't kiss, not yet. Instead, they sat on the floor of that big, cold boardroom, backs against the glass, knees drawn up like kids watching fireworks. Outside, the city twinkled in slow pulses. This room's too fancy, Gavin muttered. We can change that. How bring in more? Broken pieces, more truth, more coffee stains. Only if you brew it, he looked at her. You're not what I expected, neither are you. That's probably why this works. Probably. They sat in silence again, comfortable this time. Then Gavin whispered almost to himself, I don't want this to be a footnote. It won't be, and I don't want Lena to think people like me don't get to write. Endings. Then let's give her a new one. Later that night, Gavin came home and found Lena still awake, curled under her blanket fort, with a flashlight and a half-eaten banana. She blinked at him. Did you tell her? Tell her what that you like. Her? Like her? He laughed. Yeah, I think she figured it out. Did she like you back? It's looking promising. Lena grinned and turned off her flashlight. Good. I was worried you'd mess it up. Thanks for the vote of confidence, kiddo. You're welcome. Also, don't burn. The pancake's tomorrow. She might come over. Gavin chuckled, kissed her forehead, and pulled the blanket around her. As he turned off the lights, a quiet thought crossed his mind. Maybe some stories don't need perfect plot twists. Maybe all they need is the courage to begin again. Sunday mornings in Gavin's apartment were sacred. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon toast and coffee, the kind made too strong and poured too fast. The window was cracked open just enough to let in a breeze that carried the hum of weekend life bikes whizzing by. Kids laughing down the hall, the city finally breathing easy. Sloane stood barefoot in the living room, hair loosely braided, wearing one of Gavin's flannel shirts like it had always belonged to her. She wasn't working. She wasn't checking her phone. She was here. She's been in there for 30 minutes, she whispered, sipping her coffee. That's concentration, Gavin replied, cracking eggs one-handed into the pan. It usually means either something magical is happening or she's feeding goldfish to the toaster again. Should we be worried a little? A quiet ding came from the corner. Lena's voice called from behind the bedroom door. Dad, Sloane, you need to see this. They glanced at each other, eyebrows raised. Gavin wiped his hands on a towel and led the way. Sloane followed, coffee in hand. Inside, Lena was perched at the edge of Gavin's old desktop, eyes wide and glowing with mischief. On screen was the game Gavin had coded for her years ago, Lena's Labyrinth. a simple maze game with puzzles and power-ups and an AI pet dragon named Sparks. But today, something had changed. A glowing update. Available button blinked on the screen. "What's this?" Sloane asked. "It's not for me," Lena whispered. Gavin chuckled. "Actually, it is." He knelt beside her and clicked update. The screen faded. A loading bar appeared. Then, pixel by pixel, an animation began to play. Not part of the original game. It started with a cartoon janitor sweeping a hallway under flickering office lights. A tiny paper airplane flew in and hit him in the back. He turned around to find a woman in a business suit holding out a crumpled sketch of code. Sloane gasped. "Is that keep watching?" Gavin said quietly. The cartoon janitor took the paper, looked at it, smiled. The music changed warm, hopeful. The animation zoomed out. Suddenly, a little girl burst in riding a dragon, scooped up both characters, and soared over the city skyline, trailing binary code in the sky like fireworks. Then, as they landed on a rooftop under stars, the screen faded to black. A single line of text appeared. "Dear Sloane, if you're reading this, press enter." Sloane's hand hovered over the keyboard. Her voice was barely a whisper. "This is really happening?" "You'll want to press enter," Gavin said, a bit sheepish. She did. The screen bloomed, with a slow cascade of photos, drawings, and memories. A grainy security cam of Gavin scribbling on the whiteboard that night. Lena holding up a world's best dad mug, grinning. Sloane asleep on Gavin's shoulder during a late-night brainstorm. All three of them laughing over pancakes, messy hair, and syrup on noses. And finally text again. "You gave me back my voice. You saw the value in me before I knew how to show it. You didn't fix me. You walked beside me while I grew. So now I'm asking, will you be part of our family forever?" At that moment, Gavin stepped behind her, quiet, steady, holding a small open box with a simple gold ring. No diamonds, no flourish. "It's not perfect," he said. "But neither are we, and that's what makes this real." Sloane's eyes welled. She turned slowly, looking down at the ring, then up at the man who once swept hallways in silence and now stood steady in his own light. "You didn't just write a proposal," she whispered. "No, you wrote our story, and I want to keep writing it with both of you." From the corner, Lena, arms crossed one eyebrow, raised, declared, "Say yes, please. He can't cook alone." They all laughed, tears and joy tangled in one beautiful, clumsy breath. Sloane took the ring, slid it on her finger. Perfect fit. "Yes, Gavin Brooks," she said, voice thick. "Yes, 1,000 times over." That evening, the three of them sat out on the fire escape, watching the sun melt behind the buildings. Gavin held, Sloane's hand in one, Lena curled against his other side. The city buzzed beneath them, but they were still. Sloane leaned her head on his shoulder. "What do we tell people?" she asked. "The truth," Gavin said. "That a janitor fell in love with the CEO. That a man who nearly gave up found a woman brave enough to stay. And that a little girl with a toy dragon made it all happen." Lena chimed in, not opening her eyes. "Exactly that," Gavin smiled. "That's not a story," Sloane whispered. "That's a miracle." He kissed the top of her head. "Funny how the smallest things change everything." As the stars blinked on one by one, Gavin looked out at the horizon. Once so far away now, just the edge of a new beginning. He had spent years cleaning up messes made by others. But this was the first thing he'd built for himself. Not a fairy tale, not a rescue, just three imperfect hearts choosing each other. And in that quiet, messy, beautiful truth, he finally found home. And that was the story of how a janitor's quiet genius, a little girl's hope, and a CEO's second chance came together to rewrite what family really means. But now, I'd love to hear your story. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment and let me know. I read everyone, and your words mean more than you know. If this story touched your heart even a little, Please subscribe to the channel so you never miss another tale of love, redemption, and the quiet power of kindness. There's always another chapter waiting. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never underestimate the power of a gentle,